And you're still watching G20 Overview here on TVR World, coming to you live from Bali, Indonesia. I'm Rahmat Idris. The G20 holds a strategic role in widely securing future world's economic growth and prosperity, aligning towards the idea of sustainability. However, following the recent geopolitical situation in the world and other global challenges, the scope of discussion under the G20 has expanded over the years to include both financial and non-financial issues. Especially this year, the G20 Leaders Summit is overshadowed by the war between Ukraine and Russia, one of the group's member countries. How will Indonesia hold the presidency this year, which seeks to keep focus on global economic issues? And will India, who will take over the presidency in the 2023, face even more challenging conditions? Joining me to talk about this topics are Director of the G20 Research Group and the Global Health Diplomacy Program at the University of Toronto, Canada. Flying in all the way from Canada, we greet Professor John J. Curtin. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us in this dialogue.
Great to be here.
And also at the end of our table of conversations, we have G20 specialist with the Parahyangan Catholic University in Bandung of West Java Province, Indonesia, Mr. Julius P. Hermawan. Professor, thank you very much for joining us.
Very pleasure to be here.
All right. Let's just dive right into our topic. But I'd like to begin first by reviewing previous presidency prior to Indonesia's. We're aware that Italy handed over just last year to our president, that was then Prime Minister Mario Draghi, to President Joko Widodo in Rome, Italy. Professor John, from your observations, because Italy proposed the theme of people, planet, prosperity, how do you review the entire presidency of Italy in 2021?
Italy's G20 did a good job. The overwhelming priority, of course, was the deadly COVID-19 pandemic. So it put health first and produced more commitments on health than any G20 summit before. And when the leaders went home, they complied with them. They kept those promises quite highly, 79%. Another big issue, of course, was one still with us, front and center, climate change. There they made a large number of commitments, 22, complied with them, well, only at 73%. But I think one of the secrets of success of the Italian presidency was that they held not just one summit, but 3 during their year. One on health, another on Afghanistan, right, a tragedy that is still with us, so close to Indonesia. So we'll have to see how the G20, well, when we look ahead next year, right, might live up to that part of the Italian year.
Right. So did you consider the Italian presidency a success? And what sort of lesson learned from that presidency that was continued, adopted by Indonesia for this year's presidency, Professor?
Well, I think the main thing is that Indonesia very wisely stayed with the central themes, the central priorities, if rearranging them a bit, right? People, planet, prosperity. For Indonesia, of course, it was the global health architecture. So health first, perhaps even more than Italy did. Digitalization in the middle is, I think, the secret driver of growth, often said, but not really focused on at G20 summits. And then, of course, the renewable energy transition, which is really a key driver of climate change control.
Yeah. And that is a continuation of many global platforms addressing the same issue as well. I'd like to go over to Professor Julius now. Mr. Julius, how did Indonesian presidency translate all of these challenges from the previous presidencies and then bringing it into our own and distinctive presidencies with the 3 main pillars, as previously mentioned by Professor John?
Of course, it's not very easy actually. But as presidency, then we have the responsibility to maintain the progress that already achieved under the Italy's
Italian
presidency. That's very important. Of course, John is quite right. When Indonesia put the first priority agenda on health governance, which is very important. But of course, the question is, so many questions, of course, regarding the health governance, like the vaccination is very important. Last year, only few people get vaccinated.
So equal access to vaccines
definitely
is still a problem.
Still a problem now.
Okay.
Luckily, I think 65% of the total population in the world already vaccinated now. But the problem is not equal. If we compare between developed countries or population in developed countries, also in African countries, for instance, there is a huge gap between themselves. Now the question, of course, funding, the money. Talking about the future agenda to strengthen the health governance is a big issue. Also, the funding. Who will provide funding, financial support, including for the developing countries to have preparedness, responsiveness if the next pandemic could happen in following years or 10 years or even decades.
I guess that particular point was mentioned over and over again by our Minister of Finance, Sri Mulyani, the PPR, Pandemic Preparedness and Response.
Exactly.
And the financing support for that. Continue, please, Professor.
Yes, yes, of course, the commitment by the members is very important. Developing countries should contribute to the financing, raising the funding for the financing issues. That's very important.
Right. Piggybacking on that, Professor John, how do you view Indonesia's presidency in translating these pillars and these key principles into deliberations and meetings throughout the year of our presidency?
Well, on the first big one, the global health architecture as a whole, not just chasing the current disease, the Indonesian G20 has already delivered its one big success, the Financial Intermediate Fund, as you mentioned, on pandemic preparedness
PPR,
and response, and not just by creating a new institution, but empowering the existing multilateral institutions, the World Health Organization over in Geneva, the World Bank in Washington, D.C., to work together. Now, I think the only outstanding question over the next couple of days is it was all agreed that we needed $10 billion to get the ball rolling, to start, right, just this year. The last I looked, we were only at about 1.4 billion. So we'll have to see if the most powerful leaders of the most powerful countries in the world can come up with the rest of the money to make it a pure success, and also then promise to do more in coming years, because already we've got monkeypox. We've even got polio coming back in the developed countries.
And tuberculosis is still an ongoing problem in many countries as well.
Indeed, and we have a new pandemic, a silent one on mental health as well.
Exactly. Exacerbated by poor attitudes in online and media platforms as well. Digital literacy, which is touching on digital transformation, be it technological-wise, but also human-wise in terms of the resources. So what's your take on this, Mr. Yulis, piggybacking on the health issues that we still need to raise a lot of concerns? Professor mentioned that we're only up to the 1.4 billion from the 10 billion targeted.
Of course, it should be in the declarations, the commitment by the leaders, that's the first thing. And then the second, the next presidency, which is India, should continue.
Okay. Professor Yulis, Mr. Yulis, India is already a part of the G20 Troika, the current, previous, and incoming G20 presidencies. And in 2023, when India holds the presidency, it will be the first time for the G20 Troika consisting of 3 developing countries, because it's Indonesia now, and then India coming up next, and then Brazil coming up next. 3 vibrant, colorful countries holding the presidencies. Does that mean that the 3 South countries and developing economies will have a stronger voice in directing and sort of framing the discussions within the G20 member states?
Yes, at least there is opportunity for these developing countries to play a greater role.
Okay.
Of course, as a presidency, you can set up the priority agenda. That's the first thing, the privilege of the presidency. And then the directions, directing the negotiations by providing, preparing for the concept notes, background paper, something like that. And then negotiation, of course, sharing the negotiation process.
Yeah.
That's the privilege of the presidencies.
Yeah.
And then the strength of the presidency from developing countries, of course, they should present and articulate the interests of developing countries. This will be very important.
Has that point been achieved so far throughout the Indonesia's presidency?
Yes, of course, of course. Looking at the pandemic and impact of the pandemics, who suffer much? Of course, developing countries. We are talking about debt restructuring now, for instance.
Debt restructuring.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Then that should be on the negotiation table.
Yeah.
Already on the negotiation table already. That's one thing. Of course, many things like on climate change, there is still pledged by developed countries, like your country as well, 100 billions annually by 2020, which is not achieved yet. It is very important financial support for developing countries to mitigate and adapt it to the impact of the climate change. That's very important. And it is also in the negotiation table. Very hard, very tough negotiation, we know.
Yeah, and at this point of time, very delicate as well.
It is, indeed.
Because plenty of these member states are non-alliance countries, non-alliance states, so taking no sides, as opposed to the Western alliance on the table. What's your take on this? Anything to add on this particular point of discussions, Professor John?
I think it's important that the three countries in a row, Indonesia, then India, then Brazil, and we could add a fourth, South Africa. Sure, they're developing countries, but they're rapidly rising powers. They're big developing countries. And above all, they are democracies. So we do see that the G20 is a powerful instrument for democracy in
thrive.
the world.
Yeah.
Indeed, at a time when, as Joe Biden has said, the grand challenge of our time is authoritarianism versus democracy. And not just democracy, as some countries have benefited from it, but India, one of the most multicultural, multi-religious countries, as is Indonesia too, right?
Yeah.
So democracy that is totally inclusive makes it work for everyone inside, and everyone includes the indigenous peoples too, which these countries, I think, cherish, have an abundance, and with Lula da Silva, probably the most well-loved G20 leader in history, now democratically elected and back. I think
in
good
Brazil,
things are in store.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Before we delve deeper into what to expect from India's presidency next year, Professor, I'd like to get your take, because prior to our discussion, Mr. Julius has informed me that you are one of the most literate and also informed person we can ask about presidency, something that you've been observing for many, many years, starting in 2008 even, when the focus then was solely on finance. So throughout the years, how do you think that presidencies have evolved, and what is the exact essence of a presidency? Because we know that a certain country assuming the task should pay attention closely to what's currently going on globally and translate it into their missions as they assume the presidency. What's your take on this, sir?
Well, the great visionary of the G20, as we know it now, was the then Canadian Finance Minister, Paul Martin. And watching the financial crises of the 1990s, you'll remember the Asian turned global financial crisis of 1997 to 1999, all too well, sadly, here in Indonesia.
Yeah.
He said we need more than the old G7 dominated by the European and Atlantic powers. We need what turned out to be very quickly the G7. At the beginning, yes, what made the G7 rise to the leaders level was, of course, the American-turned global financial crisis of 2008. But even before then, the G20 at the ministerial level, finance ministers, had become a global security governor. So when the terrorists hit the Twin Towers in New York, Washington, D.C., the Pentagon, right?
Yeah.
G20 finance ministers reconfigured to focus on terrorism, and the G20 has dealt with that ever since, along with crime and corruption, right? Part of the political agenda. And even flash forward, 2013, Vladimir Putin hosted the summit in St. Petersburg, and it was a great success. It focused on the actual use of weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons in Syria. The leaders devoted their opening dinner to it, and at the end of it, Vladimir Putin told Syrian President Bashir Assad, "Stop," and he did. So a great success on dealing with one of the critical issues, that's hovering over our heads now.
Right. 2014, if I'm not mistaken, the presidency was Australia. And
Indeed.
that particular moment, one of the focuses was the annexations of Crimea by Russia, which is something that has given birth to what we're currently witnessing and what's currently transpiring in Ukraine. So was that a pivotal moment that we should have been able to read how Russia will have the intentions to expand their power as it did during the Soviet time?
Well, it was not just the invasion, the annexation of the Crimean region of Ukraine. Of course, Mr. Putin's support for the forces in the region were responsible for downing an airliner, a Malaysian flight, killing so many
I mentioned 140. I remember the number in there.
And there, an act of, aircraft terrorism of the worst sort. The G7 leaders, yes, it was divisive, but in the end, they all decided to give peace a chance, to use that phrase, to speak to Mr. Putin, to allow him to come, to see if they could convince him that this was the wrong way to go. It didn't work. That was not enough. So those say, oh, let's talk to Mr. Putin now, or even just let's have a ceasefire. I think so many have learned it's the wrong way to go. So I think it's probably a good thing that Mr. Putin has decided to stay home.
Right. When we talk about divisiveness, the dividing lines throughout the year across the G20 deliberations in Indonesia cannot be more obvious, cannot be more palpable. And I'm going to go later to you, Mr. Julius, to get your insights on what are the opportunities and the challenges for India's presidency. But we'll have to take a quick break. So stay with us right here on TVR Our World for more dialogues here on G20 Overview. We'll be right back. Welcome back to today's editions of G20 Overview. We're still here at the studio in Bali with our two guests discussing what to expect for next year's India's presidency. I'm going to go straight over to Mr. Julius. Yes. The reason I certainly just opened my phone because I was forwarded by my colleague in India, in New Delhi. The logo and the theme have been launched by the Indian government for their G20 presidencies. So 2023 India's G20 presidency, one Earth, one family, one future. What are the opportunities and challenges for India as they embark upon the presidency task? Mr. Julius.
Yeah, interesting. That will be very interesting theme of the presidency for the next year, of course. But of course, India will depend on the success of Indonesia.
Yeah.
And the main responsibility of India is, of course, to follow the legacy, to follow up what already adopted in Indonesia.
Exactly.
And I will say that's the opportunity. So this was, for instance, a very important example of the success of Indonesia is the roadmap, the Bali Energy Transition Roadmap, and we shall be very proud of that. Hopefully, will be adopted in the next 2 days.
Yeah.
And then the next job for India is, of course, to ensure that the roadmap will be still on the negotiation table with the clear actions and, of course, the commitments to follow up. So the opportunities given by the success of Indonesian presidency, actually that's the same that we have the opportunity to receive the leadership from Italy, the roadmap, the sustainable finance roadmap.
Okay.
Then we continue negotiating on the roadmap, and then now I think great success to have a dashboard, which consists of the report by members towards their best practices, their experiences in mobilizing the finance for climate change. That's very important. So the opportunities given by the success of Indonesia.
All right. So those are the opportunities as the torch is passed from Indonesia to India.
Yeah.
The challenges.
Of course, the geopolitical challenge still there. That's the first.
Yeah.
I don't know how India will manage the issue.
Yeah.
Another issue, of course, on climate change. India has different states of achievement, including submission of the nationally determined contribution (NDC), can affect the question on the climate change. Indonesia is already, is good in managing the debatable issues on, like target ambition, the climate target ambitions, limiting to 1.5%, degrees Celsius. Then India need to confirm that, maintain the commitment, the consensus that already achieved in Indonesia. We don't know with the
and
China
at the
with
same time,
perspective. Yes.
managing the prospect that there will be one of the most populous countries, if not the most populous countries on Earth. So battling climate change is a bit of a, probably a great challenge for the country. And continuing on that, Professor John, how do you think India should and will make the most of their opportunities and address all of these challenges in order to make the case that this will be the best presidency that India could ever serve for the G20?
I think they've gotten off to a great start. A year from now, by the time we get to Delhi next September, we will have won the war against Russia in Ukraine. We will have won the war against COVID-19 as we know it today. But we will still be losing the war against climate change. So India, I think, Prime Minister Modi has recognized that, and he's put the earth, the environment first. And then it's for the people, and then it's for the future, right? Intergenerational equity, the foundational principle of the Brundtland Commission way back when, of course, as we get even closer to the 2030 deadline for reaching all of the sustainable development goals. So I think just in the theme, we do see that Mr. Modi has said the great coal-fired India will become a leader in controlling climate change by making the renewable energy transition launched here in Valley a transformation in Delhi. And we do know that it's not going to come at the cost of India's growth. It's one of the most rapidly growing economies in the world. China's not the story. India is the future. So
it is predicted by 2030 it's going to surpass China in terms of populations, because China is currently experiencing contractions in population growth, and there's limitations also to how many children you can have within one household. Continuing on that, Professor, there is this one interesting case that I'd like to get your attention to, which is the repeated use of the word one Earth, one family, one future. Is this in a way stressing that, okay, G20 member states, we should come together as one, because all of these seeds of divisiveness we can no longer tolerate. And India also still maintains quite a close relations with Russia. Do you think that they can do something, advocate something? You also said we would have won the war between, meaning that it's going to resolve itself, Russia and Ukraine. What's your take on this, Professor? I'd like also to get your insight.
I think it'll be won
this.
on the battlefield. And I think Mr. Putin is slowly starting to remember that it's not the great patriotic war that he'd like to eulogize. We can go back to previous moments in Russian history. So he has no choice but to eventually give back all of Ukraine to the Ukrainians, and that includes Crimea.
Restoring its sovereignty.
Yes, and its complete territorial integrity, and only then do we face the opportunity of working with Russia on controlling climate change, on making their energy transformation ones that work for the Russian people. So building the peace, not just in Ukraine, rebuilding it, but in Russia too, will be a big challenge. But you're quite right. India was one of the foundational members of another summit like the G20, the BRICS, starting in 2009. It was really a Russian invention. They knew they needed India along with China, Brazil, another G20 host soon to come, and South Africa after it. So the Indians have a great deal of experience in dealing with the Russians for a very long time.
Developing countries one after another. Your insights on this, Mr. Yunis?
I guess India learned a lot from the negotiation under the presidency of Indonesia. The geopolitical tensions has corroded solidarity among the members. So the divide is very sharp between, say, the West, European Union, and other European members, and the United States versus Russia, which receives support from China. That's the first thing.
Okay.
The good thing for Indonesia is already successful in maintaining the unity of G20. So still 20, G20 still 20. Even though in the past, United States, European countries, Australia demanded Russia should be the members of Russia should be suspended from G20. So G20 should become G19, but it didn't happen. But still, the negotiation is very hard in the G20 with the presence of Russia, different view from the European countries, European members. Then the situation. So putting one family is very important. Valuing the solidarity. That's very, very important for negotiation. Otherwise, you cannot compromise, reach consensus on so many things.
Right. So the use of word once really means something, that we should come together again within the G20. We only have 5 minutes left, I was informed, for our dialogues. I'd like to get your take on the final questions for each of you. In the matter of 4 days, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be accepting the presidency from President Joko Widodo of Indonesia. And traditionally, he will be delivering remarks on behalf of the upcoming hosts. What do you think he will say? I'll go to Professor Julius first.
Wow, it's very difficult to predict what people will say. Of course, the commitments, India's commitments on the three themes that India would like to highlight under his presidency. That's the first thing. And presenting the argument behind why one family, why one earth, something like that. That will be on his speech.
Right. Anything else to add on? Because, as you said, they need to piggyback on the achievements that we've made so far, all the strides from Indonesia's presidency.
Of course, there's a standard. He needs to ensure leaders that India will continue to maintain the progress that already achieved in Indonesia. That's he will say that, and it will be very important. So energy transition still on the agenda. Digitalization hopefully still in the agenda.
And the health issue, do you think, will become a priority as well?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Over to you, Professor John. what do you think will be in mind of Prime Minister Narendra Modi as he accepted the presidency?
I think we'll see much more specific issues identified, and it'll be a very full-strength agenda with climate change first, not only through some of the familiar concepts like the circular economy, green hydrogen, but green procurement, green tourism. That's the 1/10 of the traded economy is in tourism and travel. So if we can green that, we're on a roll. Digitalization, that's the key to healthcare in Mr. Modi's mind, but it's also key to economic growth. So I think we'll see a much stronger emphasis on that. And something that's really new, more of an emphasis on education, labor and employment, but also mobility. Immigration is good for you, right? That's a lesson to many of those in the United States, in the United Kingdom, but the great Indian diaspora globally, right? It's worked for India. It's worked for the countries that have received them. So I think Mr. Modi gets it. That's the one area where globalization is not where it should be. So I think globalization means one world, the freedom to travel to live where you want, a key part of that.
Yeah. What about multilateralism? Because it is something that's been proposed over and over again throughout many deliberations in Indonesia, and also to address the challenges of food and energy crisis. Can we ensure through India's presidency the ideas of tackling the food and energy security in the time coming? Just very quickly before we end this.
Yes, this is very important points, because there is tendency that countries now use and adopt unilateral approach.
Okay.
So in this declaration, multilateralism should be there, and then India will continue to advocate the multilateralism, which means they need to support multilateral forums like United Nations to play the role. WHO continue to play the role, something like that.
Yeah. Something to add to this, Professor?
Yeah, a central concept for Mr. Modi's India and for its G20 is to cut consumption, stop buying stupid stuff we don't need. And for food security, well, we can solve much of the climate change problem if we just eat more plants and less meat. And India has long been a global leader in that as well. So I think Mr. Modi will draw on the traditional proven strengths of India to help guide us through an otherwise deadly challenge.
Well, on that note, I just spent a couple of weeks ago for 10 days in Gujarat, where I became an instant vegetarian. So I'm sure you have that experience, where we eat from grains and walk the path of Mahatma Gandhi. That's probably something that India's presidents can also infuse to the G20 presidency throughout the year. We've come to the end of our dialogue. I know that we've just only scratched the surface of it, but we look forward to how things will unfold at the summit and what the Prime Minister Narendra Modi will actually convey to the public. I'd like to express our sincere thanks and gratitude to our guest today, G20 specialist with the Parahyangan Catholic University in Bandung of West Java Province, Mr. Julius P. Hermawan, and also Director of the G20 Research Group and the Global Health Diplomacy Program at University of Toronto, Canada, Professor John Curtin. Thank you very much, Professor, for your times and your valuable insights for our program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that also brings us to the end of our program here on G20 Overview. And next up, we have the focus today with our partner, my partner rather, Asia Pabian, coming up in just a few minutes. So thank you for watching. I'm Rahmat Idris. Bye-bye for now.